Hi, I'm Finn. This video is going to be the first part of a two-part mini-series collaboration with the YouTube channel AmygdalaVids. If you like this video, I bet you're going to also like part 2. Before I begin, I'm going to quickly list some attributes I think are really interesting about this channel and why I think this collaboration is going to be really cool. His channel is super creative. It uses a lot of interesting animation, it has a lot of humor, and the philosophy he discusses is very easy to understand and usually very easy to implement. There are 7 sections of this video. I'm going to try as best I can to explain easily every concept that I discuss, and I've included a bonus section of the video just as an extra chance to explain any tangents or different concepts that I omitted from the video. Now, if I haven't answered questions adequately enough, please feel free to ask questions in the comment section. Okay, so now to segue into the topic about death. So the Force, right, is like an energy field that sort of surrounds and penetrates all living beings in terms of Star Wars. So Yoda is the main guy, he's the Grand Jedi Master. So he's sort of the mouthpiece of the Jedi in this sense. However, let me just say that Epictetus is going to be the mouthpiece for the Stoics. Now the Stoics believe in a rational cosmos, sort of like the Force. There's reason to it. Nature itself, like there's certain things that you can't avoid. One of those things is death. Now the same thing for the Jedi. They believe that you can't really avoid death, and that also you not only should you not avoid death, but death is natural. You should rejoice for people who are going to die. You shouldn't cry for them. You shouldn't freak out. You should understand that death is natural, and that if you try and grab on to people who are going to die, that's going to lead to some not so healthy thoughts. This is what Epictetus in a lot of ways believes. You shouldn't grasp onto people who are dying. You shouldn't freak out about it. That being said, the greed bit is more of the Jedi philosophy. So the grasping thing, that's a little bit more of Jedi philosophy. That's Yoda. So I left that in as a contrast because Epictetus doesn't believe that in the same bent that Yoda does. Right, so in a brief way, what I'd like to discuss is that the Stoics, like the Jedi, they have similar beliefs, but they have different emphasis. They have very different emphasis. So one thing that they're in the same vein along death, okay, but like managing and training oneself is kind of a difference. So this next point is mainly about what exactly they're talking about in terms of training in relation to training yourself to not fearing death, right? So Yoda says train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Among those things is death, your own life, but mainly this is in reference to Anakin freaking out about losing his wife. So doing a lot of things because you fear to lose those things is what Yoda's trying to preempt against. He's trying to guard someone who's kind of impressionable against doing something stupid because he's freaking out about it, he's fearing about it. Marcus Aurelius is pretty long-winded in this quote, and I apologize for that. However, the whole quote is pretty important. He says essentially, rather than not freaking out about how do you lose your son, how do you train yourself to not freak out about losing your son? How can you train your mind, right, to not be afraid of losing what you love, which is almost exactly what Yoda is talking about. There's 2 concepts that are similar with this. So there's amor fati, right, which means love of fate, or love of one's own fate, something like that. There's memento mori, which is remember that you will die, or remember death, something like that. So memento mori is important because if you don't remember that you're going to die, and everyone that you know, everyone that you love and cherish is going to die that's mortal, you're going to have some rude awakenings because those people are going to die. Amor fati is like, this is your fate. You can't just accept it. For the Stoics, you should love it. You should embrace it. Very similar to the Jedi. Now, they don't have sayings like this exactly, but they do have a major emphasis on the Force. Like, may the Force be with you. Sort of, it's like an invocation of sorts. I guess in a lot of ways, it's sort of wishing someone that they go with the Force, that they don't go against the Force, that they understand the nature of life, that life is mortal, life has an end. Not live to the fullest, not exactly amor fati, but it's close to amor fati. It also has an element of memento mori in there, which is important, and I think that there is definitely a connection there between the Stoic and the Jedi thought, especially between what Yoda says and what Marcus Aurelius says in his meditations. Okay, so to sort of switch from Jedi to Sith, we've got sort of a 180 flip. They both acknowledge the Force, although the Sith, their answer to the Force is like, oh, I have to die? Well, oh shit, I'm gonna go as long as I can without living. That part I'm gonna get to in the next part. However, what I want to focus on now is that the Sith, in particular, what I'm going to use as the main justification for this idea is Darth Vader. Have this idea of like, I'm going to die, I exist, but I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. Rene Descartes had this idea, right, that he couldn't prove his existence, but he could prove that he thought. And the fact that he thought had a very significant weight to him. It means that he existed in some sense. And he couldn't disprove that some demon was sort of controlling his entire life, but he could prove that he thought, and his thoughts meant something, right? So it's a definition and it's an anchor in one's own existence. What I've done is sort of take the cogito and throw it out, because the Sith don't believe this. So what they believe is that you can kill. Neko means I kill, or I murder, or probably literally I harm in Latin. So I've changed it to Neko ergo sum, which is more like the Sith philosophy, is like I kill and therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum means I think therefore I am. So the Sith version is like, let me kill as many people, that's my lifeline. As long as I'm killing people, I exist. And the moment I stop killing people, I might as well not exist. That's essentially how Darth Vader views it. Part of the reason Darth Vader becomes not Darth Vader is he stops killing people. I mean, really, it looks like he kills Palpatine, but he sort of gets retconned, and that's not actually the case. So things change. He sort of does a 180, and he supposedly brings balance to the Force. He's able to become a Force ghost and transcend his Sith philosophy, although it's sort of dubious why exactly. Another thing to briefly mention is that Darth Vader's actions really are emblematic of the way he thinks rather than his words. He's actually pretty laconic. He doesn't say a whole lot. There are quotes that indicate what he's thinking, but generally speaking, he just kills a lot of people, and that's why you can say that his actions demonstrate his philosophy. Segueing slightly, I briefly mentioned the idea that the Sith will do anything to prolong their lives. My main point in there is that this literally happens. So several times during the series, Palpatine is the main example, right? So in the 9th episode, although a lot of people don't like it, he literally sucks the life or vitality out of people using the Force. Now this is sort of like a workaround. I'll talk about this in the bonus section, but it's he doesn't want to attribute any existence to the afterlife, so he's gonna maintain his physical existence for as long as he possibly can. Whereas the Jedi wouldn't do this. There are some that have extremely long lives like Yoda. As far as we know now, that's not because they prolonged it on purpose. It's just like a species difference. The difference here is that like Plato is a stand-in for a different viewpoint. And Plato is big on philosophy. So he's talking about the aim of philosophy is to prepare yourself for death, that sort of thing. Is like a training. Plato wouldn't say that Palpatine has trained himself for death. He's trained himself to prevent dying. He's in a delusional state and won't allow himself to die and won't allow himself to succumb to the Force. He like perverts the Force and uses the Force however he wants in order to get what he wants, which is to extend his life as far as possible. That's his main and sole aim, right? And this next quote about Plato, Socrates says it, right? So this is the literary Socrates that's talking, and it's written by Plato, not the historical Socrates. That's a little different. This next quote, which is on the right side, which is all about finding true wisdom, it's something that the Jedi would probably agree with, that there's true wisdom beyond life. And so you shouldn't do anything you can to maintain what you have in the physical reality. You should live your life, and when it happens to end, you go to a place where you can maybe access all wisdom, which is something that the Sith will not do. They're very reluctant to do this, and they don't believe that there's all wisdom. They just believe that it's all kind of nothing afterward. Okay, so for the next part, it's sort of a conclusion idea. So it sort of unifies the Jedi and Sith, the differences between how they think, and then also what's different between Kierkegaard and the Jedi and the Sith. Kierkegaard has some ideas that sort of lean towards the Jedi, but realistically they're more human-centric. They're less centric with fiction. So I wanted to sort of distance myself from the previous ideas, which they're interesting and they have some relevance to the fiction, but this is more interesting for the human. So yeah, how does Kierkegaard fit into all of this? I mean, what is a cup script anyway? I don't even know what that means. So essentially, Kierkegaard is talking through Johannes Climacus, which is like one of his more often used pseudonyms or mouthpieces. He's like a literary character that espouses various views that Kierkegaard does and doesn't have. Now, this is a pretty short work, the concluding unscientific postscript, or cup as I'm going to refer to it, because yeah, it's shorter to say that. It's also more fun. And if you say cup to people, they think you're talking about a noun. In this sense, it is a noun, but it's also an essay. So this essay is mostly about becoming subjective, which for Kierkegaard is more than anything about obtaining personhood or agency, right? So in this essay or postscript, Climacus has pretty much one power. He talks about that he has power over himself, or what he calls control over self, pretty much restraint, right? So the caveat caveat is that he must use restraint every single day and every moment. He believes that if he doesn't exercise his restraint, that he's going to lose it. This is essentially the path of the Jedi, and that a lot of times they understand the Force, but if they don't act in such a way that accounts for the Force, if they don't go with the Force, if they don't act towards other people in a way that denotes them as Jedi, if they take shortcuts, which I'm going to get into here, the difference between shortcuts and the dark sides. So Yoda's idea of training yourself to not fear losing what you love is a pretty interesting idea. This is the training that I'm talking about. It's mainly about putting in the effort of training your mind to not freak out about things, and they are massive, right? Losing your loved ones is often a traumatic event, but when you use that traumatic event to do things that are terrible, like killing a bunch of kids or killing millions of people, and justifying it that way, if everyone did that, everyone would be in a lot of people would be in perpetual misery, right? And the Sith do this. The Sith, skipping the training, skipping the work, is essentially the dark side. And Yoda sort of hints at this several times throughout the series, is that like if you try and take the shortcut or the short way, you try and do things your own way, you're going to end up doing things that are like poorly justified for wrong reasons. And the Sith end up dying anyway. Palpatine dies anyway. Darth Vader dies anyway. These people all die. They're humans. Now there's a fictional quality to it, and in the bonus I'll discuss that in addition, but what seems to be the case is that the Sith take a really long and painful route, and they try and sustain themselves for as long as they can, but they live like a really terrible life, because if you get to a really old age like Palpatine, you're just like really old and decrepit, and your body's falling apart, and like no one wants to be around you because you're really dirty and gross, and your eyeballs are falling out, etc. Part of this training is still important for Jedi, Sith, or whoever's watching. It just ends up being that, like Callimachus, most people have to become aware of their mortality. What Callimachus ends up saying is that the work never stops while one is alive, to remind yourself of death. What he's talking about is mainly that you never know exactly when you're going to die. He calls this the uncertainty. The time frame in which you're going to die is unclear, but you know it's going to happen. So if you just live every day like, oh, I'm alive, it's great, it's awesome, that's fine, but you have to know that it's going to end someday, and that especially if you attach your self-worth or meaning or an excessive amount of value to someone dying and you don't temper it with reality and that it's going to end, you're going to end up in a really harmful spot. You might end up like Darth Vader and start killing people or freaking out. What Kierkegaard writes through Callimachus is that it becomes more and more important to me to think it into every moment of my life, because since its uncertainty is at every moment, this uncertainty is vanquished only by my vanquishing at every moment. So you have to remind yourself of the inevitability of death and its uncertainty, and not despair when this finally happens to us and our loved ones. So this is the end of the main content. However, I did want to include some bonus material. So this is mainly like going to be devoted to some counter arguments and alternate perspectives and some brief, albeit credible, holes in my logic. So hey, I'm glad you made it. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is two things. Mainly the Melian dialogue, which is something that I cut out. Thucydides, right, is an old favorite of mine, and he has a speech that essentially talks about why the rule of the stronger is a credible example, at least for the Athenian Empire. It's not very good logic here, but it's essentially that the rule of the strong goes, and the weak have to do whatever they can, because the strong are going to impose whatever rules they feel like, because they can. It's the might is right argument, and it really doesn't hold a lot of water, although this is the tie-in is that the Sith do this constantly. They're always trying to enslave people and perpetuate some sort of genocide or territorial expansion just to step on somebody's neck and take them out, so to speak. And this just sort of emphasizes that the Sith, they're not on the side of reason, they're not on the side of going peacefully. They're going to take everybody that they can along with them, and they're about enforcing pain on other people. So the second deal that I found was interesting, this is more of a counter argument, is this character called Darth Mammon. So he's an interesting new canon Sith Lord in the Star Wars comics who survived what would have been his death by somehow trapping his consciousness in his mask. So this breaks the canon of Sith materialism and physicalism through unexplained magic. And while these characters are now canon, specifically Darth Mammon, I think there's probably another one that I'm not aware of, but also Palpatine sort of does this. So Palpatine is able to use the Force to suck the life out of people, and you could just foreseeably probably do that forever. His life comes to sort of an abrupt end after he does this. However, you could do this indefinitely. It doesn't seem like there's a way to stop you if you just have enough Force-sensitive people to suck the life out of. Right, so it's worth mentioning that Darth Vader's repentance, as well as another alternative point of view, allowed him to maintain his Skywalker persona after death because he brought balance to the Force. Yeah, it's like a 1-1, so when Palpatine survives and Luke does, there's one Jedi and one Sith, so it should be even. Although, again, for counter-arguments, there's other Force-sensitive people all over the place that aren't really aligned in the Jedi or Sith category. So, I mean, is it really even? It's not a sliding scale, it's sort of random. And it also changes all the time. When Charles Soule decides to add this Darth Maul character or anybody else, it changes the Star Wars dynamic, and it changes the balance of the Force, so to speak. So I really appreciate you watching this far, and if you like this video at all, please go see part 2. I think it's going to be really good, and there's a lot of work put in this series. Maybe we can collaborate again if it goes well. Anyway, thank you so much, and thanks for watching.